Episode 48. Hello, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff, and I'll be your host as we listen to eyewitness encounters involving one of the most terrifying cryptids, Dogmen. Before we start tonight's show, I wanted to say hello to Stephanie Wright and her two daughters, Gabrielle and Annabelle. Annabelle, as it turns out, has a birthday coming up on the 1st of July. Happy birthday, Annabelle. Hope you have a great one. Before we bring on tonight's guest, I've got two encounters I want to read to you. Both of them are from anonymous eyewitnesses. The first encounter reads, "The encounter I'd like to share is not my own, but one my mother had. She used to tell me stories when I was young about strange things she had experienced in her life. I remembered this Dogman type of encounter while listening to your show on YouTube. There's not particularly a lot of detail to this encounter, but what you may find interesting is the location. The sighting took place in Sacramento, California, around 1953, not too far from our state's capital. Using Google Maps to get an approximate location and lay of the land, I can see the sighting area was about 1,000 feet to the west of and perpendicular to the American River. Across the river from the east bank, it's only about another 2,000 feet east to the state capital, so this took place fairly close to a heavily populated area. My mother said when she was about 12 years old, she was lying on the couch watching television. Suddenly she noticed a scary dog face looking at her through a low-pane window. The window was either on or by the door. I'm unclear on this fact. In any event, she said the head must have been about 2 to 2.5 feet above the ground. She covered her face in fright with her pillow. After a minute or so, she snuck a peek, figuring she must have been imagining things. She saw it was gone and felt a little better. Then she noticed it was now looking through another higher window. The head was now about 4 to 4.5 feet above the ground. According to her recollection, there was nothing outside that window for a dog to stand on. At that point, she just ran to another room in terror. She doesn't really recall what happened after that. She describes the animal as being dark gray with glowing red eyes. Seemingly panting or baring its teeth, she didn't see the body but had the impression it was thin. Unfortunately, she doesn't recall the time of day, month, or season. My parents tell me there is likely some American Indian burial grounds in the area, as there had been excavations near the river which yielded Native American arrowheads and other artifacts. I know it's been mentioned in some of the encounters you've presented that a proximity to rivers and Native American burial grounds increases the chance of a sighting. I even asked my mother if there were cornfields around the area, since that too has been mentioned in the encounters. She said only the small patch of corn stalks in their own backyard. I don't think that qualifies. The area around my grandparents' house was not really wooded. The neighborhood was mostly large fields with a few horses and some cattle. The area around the river is wooded though, and was probably a lot more so in 1953 than it is today. Another paranormal story about this area is that on Monster Quest's episode detailing the Mothman. Someone supposedly was taking dusk or night photographs of the Tower Bridge in 2009 and saw a flying humanoid shape or something fly off the bridge. The Tower Bridge is in the 1,000-foot range from my grandparents' house. Spooky. This next encounter occurred in Brown County, Wisconsin, and it reads, "This happened to me when I was 10 or 11. I'm about 20 now, but I'll never forget what happened that day. I was at my grandparents' house because they were watching me for the day. They live out in a mixture of farmland and woods in rural Wisconsin. Their yard is mostly surrounded by farmland, but to the right side of the yard there's a couple acres of woods and a swamp. It was a really hot, muggy morning in July. I was standing on the deck shooting at some cans with my BB gun. All of a sudden, I got the sense something was wrong. It felt like I was being watched, so I started scanning the tree line. Down at the edge of the trees, about 60 yards away by the swamp/woods, was a thing standing that I can only describe as a dogman. It was about 7 feet tall and was covered in shaggy gray hair. It had a classic dogman face with a long snout, pointed ears on top of its head, and yellow eyes. It was very muscular and was standing on 2 legs, but it appeared to be sort of leaning up against a tree. We locked eyes, and while it was probably only 10 seconds, it felt like hours. It sounds silly, but it looked like the thing had a sinister grin on its face. It was extremely intimidating. I know if that thing wanted to kill me, it easily could have. I could relive this encounter at my age now with a shotgun instead of a BB gun, and I'd still be just as terrified as I was then. It definitely had a very negative and sinister vibe to it. After locking eyes with the thing, it just bolted off on 2 legs through some of the swamp. It emerged further down the tree line and then headed off into the forest. At first, I thought it might have been one of my older cousins who lived nearby playing a joke on me. Then I realized that there was no way they could be wearing a suit, be 7 feet tall, and clear the swamp as fast as that thing did. I wasn't going to tell Grandma and Grandpa I saw a werewolf down by the swamp. They'd never believe me. So I just kept my mouth shut and tried to carry on with my day there. Well, later that afternoon I was talking to my aunt and she brought up the fact she heard strange noises the night before. When I asked what they sounded like, she said it was a lot of snarling and growling and that it sounded like an animal being attacked. Thanks both of you for submitting those encounters. I really appreciate it. Our guest tonight is Marie from Canada. Marie, welcome to Dogman Encounters Radio. Thanks so much for coming.
Oh, hello. How are you?
Doing great. Please give us a brief bio.
Well, I'm 47 years old. I was born in 1967. I've been an avid outdoors person all of my life. My first camping trip, I was only 3 weeks old. My parents took me out into provincial parks and whatnot quite a lot. So I've been doing that all my life. I've been a fisher person. I've hunted, trapped, tracking, primitive skills, survival. I've trained courses and taken other people's courses. Very familiar with my area, Northern Ontario and Temagami, the boreal forests of Canada. I'm aware of all the animals, and I'm not frightened of anything up there. I know how to react in encounters. So that's my experience.
You mentioned the boreal forest. Most people don't have an appreciation for the size and scope of the boreal forest. Please educate us on that.
In the Temagami area of Ontario, the boreal forest begins up there, and I have gone in during the summer when I was 16 years old with a canoe and a backpack, and had not seen another person for an entire month. Traveled 400 to 500 kilometers in one summer out there by canoe, and literally, if you see anything other than an airplane or a helicopter flying over, you've gotten lucky. The scope of it is immense. You're talking about thick forest, lots and lots of lakes and waterways. Roads are rare. If you do find them, it could be an old logging road that nobody's been down in 5 years. It's quite the area.
Oh, it sounds like it. I've seen shows where people like Les Stroud head into the boreal forest, and I got a fairly good appreciation for the size of the place, but from what I understand, you never really can appreciate how big it is unless you do something like fly over it and watch for hours as forest just rolls by.
The boreal forest starts up in the Dogman area and literally crosses Canada all the way to British Columbia. So well over 2/3 of the country is forested up there in that area.
That's a lot of area for something like Bigfoot or Dogman to hide. It always cracks me up when people say that there's no place for things like that to be where we wouldn't know that they're there. That's ridiculous.
You can actually go places that haven't had a human being in them before in Canada. It's a lot like wild Alaska in places, especially on the west coast, but the scope of the terrain here is immense, and there's so many places that you could hide. Criminals have disappeared into the North Woods and never come back out, and 20 years later they turn up and they show back up, and they're no longer civilized at all. So it's that way up there.
Everyone seems to have a different idea of what the word camping means. For some, it means parking a 40-foot RV somewhere. For others, it means going to a nearby Alcoa campground so they can pitch a tent next to 40 other tents. Please tell us what it's like when you go camping.
Well, we camp in a lot of ways. I have an old army tent that's 2-room. You can fit an old school Cadillac in it that we use for camping in campgrounds when we're going out with the family and having a picnic sort of thing. But when we go into the woods, I camp with a tarp, a bug mosquito net, and a couple of wood poles that we cut to set the tarp up, and an air mattress. We bring a flashlight for emergencies, but we bring a little candle lanterns, and we make a fire. It's very primitive. We carry packs that are no more than 40 pounds each, because the weight is a big deal when you're going to traverse long distances in canoe and whatnot. So our idea of camping is really primitive. It's maybe a little bit more along the lines of what the early settlers would have done moving into an area.
Oh, I'd say. We're going to get into this later on in the interview, but I just want to share with you, after your encounter, the idea that you head so deep into the woods without a second thought, seemingly, it still blows me away. But like I said, we're going to get into that in just a bit. First, though, I want to ask you some other questions like, when you were growing up, were you into cryptids like Bigfoot, the Loch Ness Monster, etc.?
Not really. I remember all of us back then, we used to watch The Bionic Man when I was a kid, and that was my only reference to Bigfoot as a child, and it was hokey. I really took an interest in cryptids probably when I was 15 or 16, and back then everything was about a great ape, and I really didn't believe too much that there was an ape. You associate apes with jungles, and we have a boreal forest. We don't have a jungle. It was only much later in my 30s that I started hearing about there being, instead of being Sasquatch being an ape, that it might be primitive man or something like that the natives believed it was, and then I got more interested. I've never ever seen a Sasquatch. I have been walking down trails and found where a black bear had stepped. Most animals will do left, right when they're walking. Black bears don't always do that. It depends on their gait, and sometimes the rear foot will settle into the forward footprint and give it an elongated appearance. So you actually have to get down on your knees and look really good, and then you'll see the claw marks of the back paw, which tells you that that was not a Sasquatch, that was a black bear. So I've got excited for seconds, and heart started racing, and looked down and then kneel down and look at this big footprint and go, ah, darn, we're not going to see one today.
After living through so many disappointments like that, where you think you've come across something like a Bigfoot track, but it turns out to be just a black bear that came walking through that fooled you temporarily, I can understand how that would kill your enthusiasm for the topic, so that's no surprise there.
I'm so enthusiastic because I'm not a doubter. I don't believe that it exists. I do believe that they're very elusive and they don't want to be bothered. And that if you move into an area that they're in, unless it's directly going to threaten their family unit, I believe that they'll just stay hidden and let you move through. I don't really think that they're... I've heard these Bigfoot attack stories and whatnot, but I'm not convinced that the person wasn't provocative in some way. Most animals, if you don't provoke them, they tend to leave you alone. So, I may be wrong, I'm not an expert, and I don't believe there is an expert on Sasquatch or the Dogman, but I think that presence and provocation are a different thing. If you're coming through and you're sticking to your established trail, because you don't want to go off trail in the boreal forest. You don't want to go wandering around. in the thick woods. Number one, it'll take you hours to go 1 mile. Number two, you're exposing yourself to the threat of broken bones. If you break a leg and you're all alone up there, you're not going home. You're going to probably not make it. Right? So it's one of these things. You stick to your established trails. You stick to your plan. You make sure people know where you're going. And if it's an established trail and maybe in a year that 50 people go down that trail, the animals tend to know that trailway, and they tend to avoid it if they cross it, but they don't tend to travel it.
I can appreciate your opinion on Bigfoot not being one of those creatures that's likely to attack someone without being provoked, but I can tell you, unfortunately, I do know of incidents, more than one incident, where a Dogman did apparently attack someone without being provoked. If anyone doesn't believe in Dogman, a conversation with a person like that who has been attacked, especially when it was an unprovoked attack, that will make you a believer. Trust me on that. Before your encounter, had you ever heard about any Dogman encounters in that area?
No, not at all. I really thought I was the only one to ever have seen one in that area. I realized differently when I listened. Because of having this encounter, every once in a while I try to research a little bit. And it wasn't long ago I was looking on the internet and I found your show. And by the time I got to episode 14, I was blown away because, this is the same area, and other people have seen it there. And then I just felt maybe I should report it because this would add to, I think it was John up in Meaford's, his number of encounters that he can report, or, since he's very interested in the subject. And that's why I reported it.
Yeah, John is a really good guy. For anyone wondering who we're talking about, she's talking about Jonathan Barber. He's been on the show twice before. Have you heard about any encounters in that area since?
I really haven't heard a lot about it. I think this is a topic that most people do like I did and say, well, I saw it, I know it's there, but I'm not going to tell anybody because I don't want to be thought of as crazy.
Yeah, I can understand that. In some places, people are a little more judgmental than in others, and from what you've told me about the area where you live, that's perfectly understandable. All right, Marie, please tell us every last detail that comes to mind about your encounter. Start from the time you picked Jody up and continue through to where you dropped him off.
At the time, Jody and I were working together at a gas bar, and he loved fishing, I loved fishing in the outdoors, and we decided that we were perfect for going out doing the buddy thing fishing, and we went everywhere. We traveled all over southern Ontario and parts of northern Ontario, going on fishing trips. And that day, it was after work. My van was all loaded. Our gear was all in there, and we just basically changed out of the gas monkey uniforms and headed on up to Owen Sound. And the idea where we were going to fish Owen Sound one night, and then because salmon fishing in our area, a lot of it's either done in the river, or you go to near the harbor, the Mudflats area, and fish there at nighttime. And basically the salmon already have a hooked jaw. So they're swimming around with their mouth open, and you're putting bait on the line and hook, and then they'll swim along and they'll catch your line and they'll just keep swimming along until that hook pulls into their mouth. And then they pretty much set it themselves, because as soon as they feel it, they hit it, and you get to have a big salmon from 10 to 25 pounds. And it's an enjoyable thing. So that's what we did. We headed up to Owen Sound, went to the Mudflats, and we fished the rest of daylight and into the night. And then a fog started rolling in from the lake. This is Lake Huron, and it's October, so it's a very cold kind of thing, and this fog was rolling in. It got kind of miserable to be sitting there at the Mudflats, because you're in hip waders, wading around, and your feet are sinking in the mud, and it's not really pleasant when you, due to the fact you have a headlamp on, and you can't really see your feet anymore because there's fog and it's dark. So we decided to head up to our van, and crawled in the back and rolled up and go to sleep till morning. And well, a knock happened on the side of the van. It was an OPP officer, so that's our Ontario Provincial Police, and he evicted us from the park because we couldn't sleep there overnight, which had never happened before. We didn't want to be bothered again, so we decided to head up the road on Highway 15. It's called East Bay Road, and there's a conservation area up there. It's called Hibu Conservation Area. At the time, it was very undeveloped. It was just sort of in the early years of the park. So we just pulled off in a little gravel pull-away, which more or less, I believe, was made so that they could bring in some heavy machinery and park it there while they were doing work. But there was no machinery in, and we pulled in there and turned the van around so we were facing the exit, and I fished around in my cooler and got a sandwich out, because by that time I was hungry, and I got an eerie feeling, kind of a something's watching us feeling. Jody had jumped out of the van to relieve himself, and had gone maybe 6 to 10 steps away from the van just into the darkness, because he didn't really want to demonstrate his things to me. And I flicked on the headlights. I felt that something was watching us, and there, about 20 to 25 meters, I'd say, away, something standing up right on the edge of the tree line. And I thought it was a man at first, and then it took a couple steps forwards into the light, which really shocked me, because usually animals don't step into the light. And this thing was upright, with a big canine head, fairly broad shoulders, muscular. I could see arms and legs. The eyes in the headlights were really amber, orangey amber color. And it appeared, at first I thought it was staring directly at me, but in retrospect I think it might have been staring at the lights of the van. This is an Econoline 250 Super Duty van. So it's a big van, and but then I yelled for Jody to get in the van, and with a lot of urgency, and I think he got that, because he turned right around and started heading for the van, and it shifted its attention to him at that point in time, and within a few seconds it made a charge at him. It was literally heading right for him, and in that course of time I had fired the van up, and Jody gets into the van, slams the door, and I believe it was a very near miss. I think it would have been on him if he had taken a second or two more. He slammed the van, and basically I threw it into gear, and I hit the fuel pedal very hard, and then we spun gravel and fishtailed out of there onto the highway. And what was really striking was, as it passed by, his door was still open. He had left it open. So as he was getting in, there was a stink, like if you have a cooler and you forget your pork chops in the cooler, and then a week later you go and get the cooler, so you're going to repack for camping and open it up, and that meat is now rotting in there. That's the smell of this thing. But it was, we were there maybe 5 minutes, and the whole encounter maybe lasted, under 1 minute. It was pretty horrifying. After that, we decided to go back to Owen Sound and get where there was streetlights and city, and I drove pretty much in silence. We drove all the way into town and went to I think it was a 7-Eleven, but it could have been a short-stop store in town back then, and the little guy inside was I think East Indian, but maybe not. We pull in and park, and we're there about 15 minutes in the parking lot talking about this thing, and then he had confirmed that he had saw pretty much what I saw, and we both had mentioned the hocks on the legs, because this thing had the upper part of the leg was at least as large as a small pony's, the muscles there, and then the hock, and then the leg narrowed out to a fairly sizable paw. So we knew we had seen something that shouldn't be, isn't any of the textbooks at that point in time, and we were pretty scared. After 15 minutes there, who should roll in but the cop again, and I guess the convenience store person saw two young people pull up in a van outside and sit there, and called the police with nerves, thinking that maybe they were going to be robbed, and so the policeman came in and tried to tell us we had to leave again, and we told our story, but we didn't tell him what we saw. We indicated it might have been a bear or something else, because, again, you don't want to seem crazy, but we thought maybe he'd at least go check it out as a police officer, but he just said, well, just don't go there again, and you can't stay here. So we started up and we drove to Meaford, which is roughly 20 minutes away, and parked in the harbor area, where again there's big yachts that pull in there, and it's well lit and well guarded and well secure, and by the time the sun was coming up, we would finally fallen asleep.
Almost everyone listening to you recount your story right now, Marie, has an idea what encountering a dogman would be like. What do they have wrong about the experience?
Oh, well, this thing's not friendly. Animals that are friendly don't charge you in general. You'll see once in a while a big dog will do a false charge and then end up licking you in the end, but this is not the kind of experience you're going to have with this thing. We were scared. I was feeling probably less affected than Jody, because he was outside with it, and I was in the relative protection of the van. And I say relative because these vans are 8 feet high. You can't go in a parking garage with one of these. They're well high off the ground, and they're really a rugged, almost a construction vehicle. And at full height, I believe its head was probably equal with or a little taller than the van if it had stood right straight up. It was a large animal, and there was a lot of aggression. I'd say that, if you see one of these things, it's because it wanted you to see it, and its intention was either intimidation or that you were prey. I had theorized a little bit about the reason for the encounter, and at first I had mentioned that to you when we spoke earlier, that I thought it might be a territorial thing, because Jody was urinating and in this area, but thinking back on that, it happened very quick, and it must have been there when we pulled in the first place. It must have been a territorial act, or this thing had just intended to scare the wits out of us. But I wouldn't stand there and point and say, look, it's a dogman. My words would be run, and run fast, and don't stand there and try to get a better look at this thing, because it can get you faster than you can run away.
Through the course of that encounter, did you ever hear any sounds?
I was in the van, and I didn't have my window open, and I didn't hear anything. I wish Jody were available to comment so I could ask him, but I didn't really hear much in the line. There, and my adrenaline was going, and my heart was pumping really fast, and you get that thunder in your ears. It may have growled, but I can't for sure say.
When Jody had that door open as he was taking care of business, was it stone silent out in the woods, or were you able to hear or notice anything like that?
It was still and silent. There was no crickets, no small animal sounds. In fact, we didn't even see a firefly, which I thought was kind of odd. But, I don't think we heard anything up to that point.
You said the fog had rolled in down on the water when you two were fishing, but in this clearing, was there any fog, or was it pretty clear?
The fog was much, much thinner in this area, because we were up across the road from the lake, and it's sort of an embankment area. There was just a trace of fog, but it wasn't really, not like terror fog you see in the fields the first thing in the morning, where it's so thick that you can't see 12 feet. It was much thinner. Visibility was really well, especially when the headlights were on.
I wonder if that officer knew something, and that's why he was so resolute about you moving on.
I don't think so. He was a young police officer, and we would have definitely been safe in the park. The park is right in the center of town. The mud flats are well lit as far as the parking lot areas, and I think we were safer in the park than where we ended up parking. I believe he was enforcing a local bylaw that no other officer had ever enforced before on us, because we'd been there many, many times before. But he seemed totally disinterested in going to investigate it at all. So I don't really understand it, but I know if I were a police officer and somebody told me an animal charged them, I would probably call animal control and go out there and have a look, but he didn't seem interested at all.
Yeah, that is a shame that he took such a nonchalant attitude about what had happened, but not much you can do about that. Because of that encounter, what kind of changes have you made in the way you do things?
Well, I used to look for campsites that were a little more where I could see a lot more of the lake, and it didn't matter if the woods were really close. And now I tend to, if I'm trekking in the interior, especially on a canoe trip, I'll try to get to a small island in a lake somewhere where there's several hundred yards between it and the shore. A lot of animals will cross water like that to get to something, but they usually don't bother with you if you're on an island. And it's a little easier, and you have a clear perspective, and you can see what's coming. Also, it's easier to get away. It's something, if you can just hop in the canoe and paddle away, you have a better chance. So now I usually look for either an open meadow or field or an island somewhere where I have a good clear field of vision, and then set up camp. I won't do it in the thick of the woods anymore. It's just not, it's not even reasonable for a normal situation where you have a bear or coyotes or something like that. You want to be able to have a good clear field of view.
When you mention the fact that you like to set up camp on an island like that as a form of protection from whatever wildlife that might be in the area that might be potentially dangerous, I mentioned in the pre-interview to you about that encounter the man happened, I believe, down in Alabama when he was fishing out of a John boat with his pit bull. Next thing he knew, that Dogman appeared on the bank and waded into the water and started swimming out to get to him, apparently. Maybe him, or maybe to get to his dog, but anyway, when I told you about that incident, I hope I didn't shoot that theory down to the point where next time you go camping, you're not going to be able to get a wink of sleep if you do set up camp on an island like that.
The one thing about that is, I actually listened to that, I believe, on one of your shows as well, but we don't carry guns in Canada unless it's hunting season or we're on our own land. It's one of these things where it's not illegal, especially in provincial parks. There's a huge fine and jail time for it. So that's your best option, unless you're going to hammock way up in some trees somewhere, which is a whole lot more work and not much of a guarantee. Bears climb trees. If a bear can climb a tree, maybe this can too. So I think it's the best option for being safe and secure when you're in a remote area away from other people. Now I go with my partner. We do a lot, so we're always two people together. And at nighttime we'll make a fire because that's our main source of light other than a few candle lanterns. And somebody will be awake to tend that fire. Somebody will sleep a couple hours and then wake the other person up and do a little bit of a watch system, because you just don't know. A bear could wander in, or another animal could wander in, and when somebody's awake, you can make noise and things to keep them away. And I know that might not work for a dogman, but I'd rather be awake when it shows up than asleep.
Yeah, I can't say I'll blame you there. When someone has an encounter with a dogman, there are certain changes that are almost expected that they would make, but after your encounter, did you make any unexpected changes in your life?
No, as far as going into the camping and going bushing, no, I learned more about survival skills. It helped me with that. I learned a lot of primitive skills on how to start fire with a piece of rose quartz and hard piece of steel, and then did a little more of the pioneering style, and I've been doing that since I've taught survival courses. Basically, this is about not letting something stop you from doing what you love. Because the way I look at it is I can go to Toronto and go to the market in Toronto and spend an afternoon there, step across the road and get hit by a truck. Or I can be driving down the highway and blow a tire and roll my car and die that way. Or I can go to a convenience store to buy some milk and end up getting shot because somebody robbed it. And the odds of that are just as high as being killed by a dogman in the woods. So you can't really let these things stop you from enjoying your life. It's just my philosophy. If you stop doing something you love because you're afraid, then you're just living in fear, and that's not a good way to live.
Along those lines, you told me in the pre-interview that you weren't going to let that encounter ruin your life, just like you were just mentioning. You said that you were going to still head out into the woods the way you did before the encounter. Have you ever wavered in your determination not to be negatively affected by that encounter?
Well, a few times I've been frightened, and I have to admit. There are a few times at night when you hear something in the woods that's not normal, and it gets your adrenaline going and whatnot. Those are the nights that you spend keeping the fire high, and we always make sure we have adequate wood for an entire night of burning, and we try to keep it going. Fire usually is a deterrent. So we can't carry a firearm in Canada. We carry bear spray, and they call them bear horns. They're same thing as a boat horn, but much smaller, and they do like 500 decibel little blasts. And I have a double bit axe that I've had since I was 15 years old. It's an old school woodsman's axe, very sharp on both sides. Usually use it for cutting deadwood for a fire or setting up shelters, taking roots out from under where you're going to put your lean-to sort of thing. And it's heavy. It's the heaviest piece of equipment that I have in my kit. So it's about 4 to 5 pounds on the end of a 4-foot handle. It'll split a piece of oak about 10 inches around in one swing. That's the last resort. If I ever had to really defend myself in the woods, that would be the last resort. And there's not too many things that won't back off if you swing it at them. I'm not saying it would save your life, because guns don't, apparently, but that's my security when I'm up there in the bush.
Well, an axe like that would be a pretty good security blanket. I'd sure hate to be on the receiving end of one of those things.
Yeah. So, you can't let fear stop you from doing what you want to do. I've encountered it one time for 1 minute in southern Ontario. From the research that I've done so far, I can see that it likes cornfields, it likes bush, it likes waterways, it likes hills. Not too many cornfields up there in the boreal forest. I don't recall ever seeing anything larger than a meadow. Although you might find some native sites. I found arrowheads and whatnot up there, but at this point I can't say that I'm afraid to go in the forest because I might encounter another one. I'm hoping that I don't ever encounter another one, but if I do, it'll be just dumb luck, I think.
Once is more than enough. You were fairly close to that Dogman when it ran past your van, but you didn't have a true up-close and personal encounter with it. If you would have been outside the van and had a true up-close and personal encounter with that thing, do you think you'd be so willing to head back out into the wilderness?
This I'm not sure of. I know that I called many, many times after that thing to go fishing with Jody or camping, and he always had a convenient reason why he couldn't go. He was slightly taller than me, and we used to jokingly call him Bigfoot because he had these huge feet. I don't know, I'd say size 14 or better feet. So he was a fairly tall, well-built, strong man at the time. And I believe that it affected him much more profoundly than me, probably because he was out of doors with it at the time.
I've got to be honest, Marie, I sure wish you wouldn't have made that comment about the whole Bigfoot thing. I know I'm going to get some emails making fun of me with regards to that. I made the mistake of mentioning on a prior show that I wear a size 15 shoe. I can tell now they're going to just start raining in. Thanks a lot.
I'm sorry about that.
That's all right. That's no problem. Along those lines of what you mentioned about Jody, Jody was understandably hit hard by that encounter. What can you tell us about the way the encounter affected him? I know you mentioned that you asked about going out after that encounter and he had these excuses for not going, but in the pre-interview you mentioned some other after effects.
He was shaken up. I think it affected him a lot more than me, largely because he was outdoors with it, and it was a near miss for him. If we had to go out of town, he didn't want to do it anymore. Basically, that's pretty much to sum it up. We eventually lost contact because the interests weren't there anymore. He didn't really talk about it a whole lot. More or less, he became non-communicative, I think.
How concerned are you about the fact that dogmen aren't proven to exist? Are you concerned about them someday being proven as a true animal that's in existence, or what?
I'm sitting on the fence. If they prove them to exist, and they prove that they can be hunted or killed, there are a lot of people who, out of fear, are going to gather up together and go out to do that. Nobody has been killed by one of these things, to my knowledge. I'm not an expert by any means at this point in time. I think respecting nature and what's in it is a really important thing. I hunt and I fish, but we hunt and fish for food. We don't do it purely for sport, although it can be exhilarating and all that. But going out to kill something just for the sake of killing it, I can't see Dogman being big on a delicacy. I don't think you can be serving that up with guests at dinner time. So no, I think if it's discovered, people may try to go out and kill it. There's been cases in histories with Sasquatch where towns have got together a little posse and went out looking for it to kill it. I think it's just plain foolishness, right? If you're going to go out and get your deer or your moose, or go out snaring rabbits or hunting turkey for the table, that's one thing. But no, I don't think if it's proven it's going to do the animal any favor at all. It's going to just cause panic and fear, and that's not a good thing. We should leave nature as natural as possible, and that includes everything that lives in it.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What would you say to the people out there who think dogmen don't exist?
There's nothing to say. They have their opinion, I have mine. If they don't believe that this happened, then that's up to them. Most people who will say Sasquatch doesn't exist or the Dogman doesn't exist don't spend a considerable time out in the forest themselves. Most of the skeptics I've seen or know in all these things seem to live in big metropolitan areas where they have their day-to-day life, and all they see is what's in front of them, and they don't see what's around them. So they're entitled to their opinion, and that's all there is to it.
Yeah, when you never venture out into the woods, I guess it is pretty easy to make up your mind about something like that not existing. But there's some pretty close-minded people out there. Having had that encounter, do you have any advice you'd like to give any of the listeners who might someday find themselves face-to-face with one of these things?
Pack up and leave. And if you have time to pack up, just leave. Like I say, I wouldn't hesitate on a northern bush trip like that. I wouldn't hesitate at all to leave the campfire and everything, grab my whatever's closest at hand, jump in the canoe and paddle away, and come back the next day in broad daylight to pick up my gear and get out of there. If you have to spend your night out in the canoe in the middle of the lake, awake, then do that. I believe that these things are territorial, and they're telling you, hey, I'm here, this is my area, go away. And if you see one, don't go back. I have never been back to that conservation area. I understand it's very much developed now. There's it's day use, and they have 2 beaches, and I'm looking on the internet at it, and that people are there all the time. But myself, I would never stay there overnight. This is animals that have territory, defend their territory, and they have reason to. So just if you see one, don't go back there unless you're just getting your stuff and getting out.
Something you just said about going back the next day if you have an encounter with one of these things makes me want to ask you, you do realize that they do come out in the daytime as well, don't you?
Yep, but my human vision is not like animal vision, and in the dark, we can't see color, and we can't see distance when we don't have particularly great eyes when it comes to darkness. And if I'm going to go back in to get my gear, that's saying that whether or not it's been ripped up or not, because I think that if you leave, it'll probably rip your stuff up. But if I'm going to get what's left of my gear, then I'm going to need that to get out, to survive, to get out of the place. So yeah, I go back during daylight hours where I have better vision and whatnot to get things that are left over so that I can make my way out of the woods. Because I don't think I'd stay. I think I'd head for the nearest access point and get out and just not go back to that area again. But yeah, I realize that they've been seen in the daylight, but it's a matter of necessity rather than, it may not be advisable, but if that's where all your equipment is, that's where you're going to have to get it. That's what you have to do.
Maybe going back the next day with a regiment from the local army base, but going back alone, even in the daytime, to such a remote area, that still might not be the best move, but only you could decide that, of course. Something I didn't ask you about that encounter that you had, did you ever have a chance to see any colors? Do you have an idea what color this thing was? Did you happen to see any coloration in its eyes? Anything on that you could share?
It was black. Its eyes were amberish, kind of an orange-yellow amber. It had gray on top of its head and its shoulders, and that may have been some kind of a light reflection, but that's what it had. The fur was matted, not long, not like long hair. It was matted, more like dog fur, like the back of a German Shepherd. Less fur on the belly area, and it was lighter colored, a little bit lighter, grayer on the belly. I didn't see teeth. I don't recall seeing teeth. It may have had its mouth open or not. But it happened exceedingly fast. I've read about people who say they see big fangs and claws. My mind was in the let's get out of here mode, and I wasn't focusing on detail in the way that some people do. I've heard about some people who actually search for genitalia. The last thing I wanted to do was sex this thing. I wanted out of there as fast as I possibly could get out of there.
If I understand this correctly, it was already there at the edge of the clearing when you turned on the headlights, correct?
Yes. I believe it was stalking Jody, or us, one of the two. I believe that it was. It seemed like, I don't know, an animal shows itself, intentionally shows itself. It's a sign of aggression, whether it be that territorial or wants to scare you off or something. I believe that it was intending to be seen at that point in time.
When you flipped those headlights on and it was already there at the edge of the clearing facing your direction, did you or didn't you say that it reeled in some sort of way?
It shifted its attention toward the vehicle. I believe it was looking at Jody in the first place. So it kind of moved its body and it straightened itself up a little bit more. Yeah, it was, that in itself was more horrifying than anything else, because for me I expected a black bear, which are not very common in the area, but they do wander in. And they, when they charge on all fours. This thing had a long loping stride as it did that. It was very unnerving.
We're used to seeing humans run on two legs. Anytime you see something like that that's running bipedally, you're used to seeing a particular posture and set of movements. When you saw that thing running towards the van, was it ungainly looking or did it run like a man? How would you describe its gait?
It leaned forward and ran, using its weight to propel it forward. And the back legs, when a person runs, their back leg extends out behind them, they lift forward, their knee rises up. They extend that knee, place a foot, the other one comes up. It's we roll when we're running. This thing was springing. It was pushing off in an entirely different way from the way people do. I think it's speed. The sheer speed of the thing is because their legs are so coil-like. It didn't shamble. It was a very direct charge. There's no doubt in my mind that this thing is immensely fast because of its leg configuration.
If I'm clear on how you described its leg structure, I know you said it had canine-style legs, but did I hear you correctly when I think you said it had disproportionately large feet?
Yeah, it had big paws. I'm not even going to call them feet. They were paws. The upper leg was very muscular, so its thighs and above to the hip were very, very muscular, slendered down right after the hock to the foot, and there was a very large paw. You know, when a foot bends, if you're walking, your heel comes up, your toes bend, and you move up from there. This was more of a flat-footed thing. The pad hit the ground and then it was off again. I didn't see any bend that I can recall. The upper legs seemed to do all the springing and work above the hock and just below the hock.
Having such big thighs, it's not surprising that they would be able to run and jump the way they seemingly can. You mentioned in the pre-interview that you didn't have any noticeable PTSD problems as a result of the encounter, but just now, before the interview tonight, you mentioned that you have had a bout with PTSD, or a form of PTSD. Tell us about that.
You and I had talked about it Friday night. I'm sleeping and I'm having a dream about this thing and pretty much reliving it. It was more of a recall dream, and all of a sudden I woke up with what I felt was a sound outside. Now I live in a fairly urban area on the outskirts of town. Lots of houses around. There's always people around at some point in time. But I had the urge to look out the window, so I got up, parted the blinds, and had a look, and there was nothing there anywhere. But there was a momentary little thing in it before my partner growled at me to get back in bed and go to sleep. So, yeah, I guess it is something that comes back to you from time to time. I don't have the night terrors and horrors that some people do, but it's a vivid memory, and it comes up now and then.
Yeah, that's totally understandable. All right, Marie, it's about time to wrap the show up. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Yep. I was horrified to talk about this subject before I talked to Vic with anybody, and he's totally non-judgmental. He'll give you information. He'll help you come to terms with it. Even if you don't want to be on the show or have your story written on his website, make the effort to contact him just because it'll at least make you feel better that you've got somebody else who's willing to listen to you without judging you. And I think that's a service in itself. The radio show is information and entertainment, and it's just as nice, but just being able to actually tell a perfect stranger what you had happen and not be laughed at is a great relief. So, make the effort to contact Vic and let him know, and you'll learn a lot, and you'll also feel better afterward.
Well, thank you so much for the really nice words there. I don't deserve them, but I appreciate it nonetheless.
You actually do deserve them.
Well, thank you. Thanks again so much for coming on the show, Marie. I really do appreciate it.
Anytime, and if you can get me in contact with John in Meaford, and feel free to give him my number and my name, and I wouldn't mind talking to him. I actually, in the light of day with lots of people around there, I wouldn't mind going back and seeing how the area has changed, and if there's anything left of that area, so I could show him where it happened. Maybe he can add that to his encounters list so that he has more information, and I'd appreciate that.
I'd be glad to. Thanks again so much for coming on the show. Like I said, I really do appreciate it. You have yourself a great night.
You too.
Thank you much.
Bye now.
Bye. If you've had a Dogman encounter and you'd like to speak with me about it, whether in private or on the show, you can reach me at contact@dogmanencounters.com. I'd love to hear from you.